That's not a question most humans ever want to answer. But for Ifiara, an alien refugee hiding on Earth, there was no time for pride-only survival. She was cold, starving, hunted, alone, and in her arms wrapped in thin, tattered fabric was a baby burning with fever, a baby who would die before sunrise unless something changed. And just when death seemed inevitable, a human crashed into her life, Angus wounded, confused, lost. He needed saving. She gave him shelter. He needed care. She healed him. But when it was her baby who cried for help, when her hand shook and she had nothing else left, she whispered a sentence that tore through the silence. All I have left to offer is myself. This is not just science fiction. This is a story of sacrifice, survival, and soul-crushing choices that push the boundaries of what it means to be mother, man, and more than human. Stay with me because once you hear what happened in the snow that night, you'll never look at love or aliens the same way again. The snow was falling like ash from a dead sky. Each flake burned Angus's skin, as if it carried memory of failure, of war, of crash alarms that came too late. His ship was gone, buried in the ice, his crew lost to silence. All he had left was blood-soaked fabric wrapped around his leg, a broken beacon, and a slow-dying will to survive. Angus wasn't supposed to be on Earth this long. The mission was simple: observe alien remnants hiding after the war, extract data, return. But missions go wrong, and when they do, men become prey. Staggering through the white wasteland, his vision blurred. His hands went numb, his mind detached from time. That's when he saw her, a woman, no, not quite human, standing barefoot in the snow. She held a bundle to her chest, her hair dusted with ice, her cloak torn, her eyes locked on to his hand. Something ancient passed between them, not fear, not threat, but a question. And then darkness. When Angus awoke, he was warm. Inside a stone shelter, lit by fire, his wounds cleaned. Across the flame sat the same woman, her head bowed, the baby resting on her shoulder. She said nothing. Just watched him, watched every move. Angus tried to speak, but his throat was dry. She moved silently, brought him melted snow in a carved bowl. She placed a thin root in his hand, food, perhaps. Her name, he would later learn, was Ifiara. An alien, yes. But unlike any he'd imagined, no weapon, no invasion, no malice, just a mother, doing everything she could to keep her child alive. But survival had pushed her past limits no being should face. The Earth was not her home. Her kind had been wiped out or scattered. Humans like Angus were trained to capture, not protect. Yet here she was, saving him, feeding him, watching him heal. And as the days passed in that frozen nowhere, he saw her life for what it was. She melted snow for water with trembling hands, foraged what roots and berries she could find. The baby, fragile and wheezing, clung to life with every shallow breath, and Ifiara never slept. Angus offered help, but her pride refused. He tried to leave to find medicine, but she stopped him. The cold would kill him. He didn't understand her words, but her eyes, they told him everything. Then came the night it happened. The baby's fever had climbed, his lips were blue, his cries faint. Ifiara looked at Angus with desperation that broke the language barrier. He reached for his bag, realized the medkit was missing, lost in the wreck. She stood, stepped closer, her voice shaking, and whispered, "All I have left to offer is myself." Angus froze. This wasn't seduction, this was surrender. This was a mother offering the last piece of her soul in exchange for her child's breath. It shattered him. He shook his head. "No," he said. "You don't owe me that. We'll save him together." What happened next would change them both forever. Snow tore through the sky like shards of shattered glass. The mountains stood like frozen giants, silent and merciless. With every gust of wind, the earth seemed to howl, not in rage, but in mourning. And in the heart of this icy void staggered a lone figure, barely alive, a man named Angus. He wasn't supposed to be here. The drop mission was quick: survey and extract. Observe residual alien movement post-war, log coordinates, return to base. But missions don't always go as planned, especially when the atmosphere bends light and radar fails in the middle of a solar eclipse. The crash had been instant: fire, metal, screaming, then silence. Angus didn't remember climbing from the wreckage, only the smoke and the cold biting. Endless cold. Now, as the light faded and snow piled at his feet, he stumbled through what felt like the last breaths of his life. His leg throbbed with pain, a long, jagged gash now sealed with a dirty bandage. The pain kept him awake. Barely. His hands were raw, his lips cracked. The beacon on his wrist blinked uselessly, battery drained. No signal. No help. And that's when he saw her. Through the haze of falling snow, barely 20 feet ahead, stood a shape, a figure. At first, he thought his mind was breaking, hallucinations born of frostbite and fear. But no, she was real. A woman, barefoot, wrapped in long, tattered robes. Her golden hair spilled over her shoulders like sunlight in a dying world. In her arms, a child. Wrapped tightly in worn cloth, unmoving. She didn't speak, didn't move. Just stood, framed by the jagged cliffs and falling snow, as if time itself had frozen around her. Her eyes were wide, impossibly bright, like two small galaxies caught in an endless winter. Angus's knees gave out. He crashed to the ground, his breath coming in gasps. His fingers clawed at the snow. He reached out with one blood-stained hand, not out of desperation, but awe. Who was she? What was she? But before the question could form on his tongue, darkness took him. The next thing he remembered was warmth. A soft glow flickering against stone walls. Crackling fire. He blinked. He was inside a small cave, somehow shielded from the storm. The air smelled of burning wood, wet moss, and something earthy. His coat had been removed. His boots sat beside him, drying. A soft material woven, not human-made, was draped over his body. His leg was wrapped in fresh bandages, clean, carefully tied. Angus sat up slowly, his muscles screaming in protest, and then he saw her again, sitting just beyond the firelight. Legs crossed, the child nestled against her chest. Her long hair glowed amber in the firelight. Her eyes watched him, not with fear, not even curiosity, but silence. Complete, unshakable silence. She was unlike any woman he had ever seen, ethereal, still. Her features held the elegance of sculpture and the weariness of someone who had suffered far more than her years should allow. The baby stirred. A soft whimper escaped its lips. She shifted, whispering something, not in English, not in any earth language. The words floated like wind, melodic and ancient. Angus tried to speak, but his throat was raw. She noticed. Without a word, she rose gracefully and approached, holding out a carved wooden bowl. Inside, warm liquid, melted snow, maybe mixed with herbs. He drank. The warmth slid down his throat, awakening something primal, survival. Who are you? He rasped. She didn't answer. She simply sat beside him, quiet as snowfall. He tried. Again, slower. What is this place? Again, no answer. But she looked at him differently now, less distant. Almost protective. He looked down at his leg. The dressing was crude but effective. She had cleaned his wound. She had dragged him here. Saved him, and she didn't even know his name. He pointed to himself. Angus. She tilted her head. Then, softly, she said, E.F. Iara. The name danced in the air like a secret. If Iara. He let it settle between them. She wasn't human. That much was clear. Her skin shimmered faintly when the firelight touched it. Her eyes reflected movement like an animal's, and yet she radiated a kind of humanity no earthborn soldier ever had. This woman, this alien alone in a frozen wilderness, had saved him. Why? What did she want? Or what had she already lost? Angus leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at his limbs. Ifiara returned to her corner, rocking her child gently. The baby coughed weakly, sick, struggling. Angus watched her for a long time, the fire crackling between them. No words. Just two survivors, one human, one not, sharing heat, breath, and the terrifying uncertainty of tomorrow. He had come here as a scout, a soldier, a watcher of alien movements, but now he was the one being watched. And deep down, something told him he was safer in this cave than anywhere else on Earth. The wind outside howled like it wanted in, but inside the cave there was only silence, not awkward, not empty, but ancient, heavy, like the kind that follows tragedy, or maybe precedes it. Angus watched as Ifiara moved softly around the fire, her bare feet never making a sound against the stone. Every action she made had purpose, pouring water into a shallow bowl, gently adjusting the baby's wrappings, placing dry wood on the fire. She didn't speak unless she had to. And even then, the words came like whispers dripping from her tongue with care, as the language itself was fragile in her world. Angus had known war. He had seen alien soldiers deadly, mutated, driven by war chemicals or technology beyond human reach. But Ifyara was none of those things. She was exhausted, thin, but graceful, worn, but dignified, and when she looked at him she didn't see a threat. She saw someone just as broken. He didn't need a translator to feel it. She had lost everything. As the days passed, Angus grew stronger. His leg began to heal, though he still limped. The shelter, though primitive, was cleverly built, narrow entrance, moss-lined walls, hidden from above. It wasn't her home, just another place to hide. Temporary, like everything else in her life, Ifyara rarely left the child. When she did, it was to step outside in the freezing cold, only for a moment to gather herbs growing beneath snow-dusted rocks or collect wood from dead trees. No technology, no tools, just memory and instinct. Her child, fragile and quiet, seemed to cling to life with the same desperate grip Ifyara used to hold her sanity. The baby, named Leorin, barely stirred. His skin was warm far too often. His tiny lungs rattled in the silence. He was sick, and she knew it. Angus had tried to ask her once about Leorin, about his condition. She had just shaken her head, then placed her palm on the child's chest, and whispered something that sounded like a prayer or a farewell. One evening, as dusk spilled gray shadows across the cave, Angus found himself staring at a small artifact tucked behind the fire. A carved stone, shaped like a spiral sun, with alien runes etched around the edge. Ifyara noticed. She knelt beside it, brushed her fingers over the surface, and for the first time, truly spoke. "Family," she said softly, her accent thick. "Gone." She traced a line in the ashes. 7 dots, 1 circle. She pointed at the dots. Then herself, then Lior. Gone. Only to remain. Angus's chest tightened. He nodded slowly, understanding not through words, but grief. He'd lost his unit in the crash, his friends, his captain, his brother in arms. Now here he was sleeping beside a ghost with golden eyes and a baby who might not survive the week. That night, Ifyara finally let her guard slip. She sat beside Angus, both of them staring into the fire as if it held answers. The air inside the cave had grown colder, the storm outside louder. But the fire burned steady. "Why help me?" Angus finally asked, voice low. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled something from the inside of her cloak, a broken device, alien tech. A communication shard, flickering, powerless. She set it on the ground between them. "Yours," she said. Then added, "Broken, like you." Angus looked at her, surprised. She gave him a rare, tired smile. "I fix people, not machines." It wasn't meant as a joke, but somehow, it made them both laugh quietly, briefly. That sound felt like life. Over the following days, Angus began to help where he could. Gathering kindling, melting snow, cutting herbs with a sharp stone she'd shaped. She taught him through gesture, through patience, through trust. And yet, the more time he spent with her, the more he realized how little she had. Her clothes were stitched from scraps. Her food supply was scavenged from frozen roots and lichen. Even the baby's wrappings were sewn from what looked like old parachute fabric. She gave him half of everything. Even when there wasn't enough. One night, Angus tried to share his ration bar, the last piece of human nutrition he had. She refused. Not out of pride, but fear. She held it, sniffed it, then looked at Leorin, and gave it all to him, not a bite for herself. That was the moment Angus understood. This wasn't survival. This was sacrifice. She didn't expect to live. She only wanted him, the child, to survive, even if it cost her everything. As the snow thickened outside and hope dimmed, Angus realized something terrifying. Ifyara wasn't just hiding from the cold. She was hiding from the world. From his world. From patrols, from scanners, from governments who would rather dissect her than save her child. And somehow, in the middle of that cold cave, she had saved him, a stranger. Not with lasers, not with tech. But with fire and silence. And the kind of courage no army ever taught. The baby's breathing changed first. It was subtle, barely noticeable at first, but Angus heard it. In the middle of the night, when even the fire dared not crackle too loudly, Leorin's breath began to hitch, then wheeze. It was soft, but it wasn't right. Across the cave, Ifiara was already awake. She always was. Sitting up, her eyes fixed on the child in her arms, her face remained calm. But her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the baby's cheeks, feeling for warmth. Angus sat up, alert now. The air felt tighter, heavier. "What's wrong?" he asked, even though he already knew. The baby whimpered a soft, pitiful sound. His skin, once pale silver, now flushed with unnatural red. His body hot, his tiny limbs twitching in a fever dream. Ifiara whispered something in her language, something rhythmic, maybe a lullaby. Maybe a plea, but the truth was stark. Even across species, Leorin was dying. Angus crouched beside them, careful not to move too fast. "He's burning up," he murmured. "We need medicine, real treatment." Ifiara didn't answer. Instead, she pulled open a bundle of dried herbs, crushed some leaves, and dipped them into warm water. She tried to cool the baby's skin, placing the wet cloth on his forehead, wiping his arms. But her hands, so steady before, were shaking. Her eyes met Angus's, and for the first time, they looked afraid. "He needs more than that," Angus said firmly. "We need antibiotics. Anti-fever serum. Something." He thought back, desperate for a solution. His crash site, the emergency medkit in the cargo hold. He hadn't thought of it in days, convinced it was lost or unreachable, but now it might be their only chance. "It's back at the wreck," he said aloud, mostly to himself. The kid, it might still be there. Ifiara looked down at Leorin, then back at him. She understood instantly. "No," she said, clear, firm. "Storm, cold, death. It's not about me," Angus replied. "It's about him." She shook her head again. Not in denial, in calculation. She knew the route better than him. She knew the weather. The predators, the eyes in the sky. Going back meant risking everything. Still, she stood. Ifiara layered the baby in thicker wraps, pulled her cloak tighter, then disappeared to the back of the cave. Moments later, she returned holding a slender, bone-handled blade and a hollow reed tube, tools of survival, not defense. She handed them to Angus without speaking. He took them. Then she did something unexpected. She touched his face. Her hand was cold, her palm resting just over his cheekbone. Eyes locked on his. She whispered, "Please," that single word held the weight of every sacrifice she'd made so far. The storm outside had quieted just enough for them to travel. The sky was still gray, the ground an endless sheet of white, but the wind had slowed. That was their chance. Ifiara led. Despite the terrain, she moved with speed and memory, navigating through hidden ridges and snow-packed paths as if retracing old steps burned into her bones. Angus followed, carrying the blade and a thermal pouch for the medkit, heart pounding in his ears. Every second mattered. Behind them, wrapped against her chest, the baby stirred with faint cries. Short, weak. Angus clenched his jaw. "Don't die on us, not now." They reached the crash site after an hour. Or maybe more. Time blurred in the cold. The ship's wreckage was nearly swallowed by snowdrifts, metal twisted into frozen sculptures. But it was there. They dug through a warped hatch. Ice cracked beneath their boots, wires hung like vines. Finally, under a half-collapsed panel, Angus found it. The emergency medkit. Still sealed. "Yes," he shouted. "It's here." But that celebration was cut short. A low hum pierced the air. Mechanical. Close. Angus turned, eyes scanning the ridge. A drone, small, hovering, armed, a government patrol scanner, probably searching for survivors or something not human. It saw them. The red sensor blinked. A targeting system activated. "Run." They sprinted back through the snow, Ifiara shielding Leorin against her chest, Angus clutching the medkit like a lifeline. Behind them, the drone fired. A warning shot blasted into the ice near their feet, vaporizing snow in a flash of blue light. Angus shoved Ifiara down behind a rock and raised the blade, but she was faster. She pulled the hollow reed, loaded it with a small dart, and blew. The drone blinked, wobbled, then dropped, a direct hit. Ifiara's aim dead perfect. They didn't stop. Not even to breathe. By the time they reached the cave again, both were on the verge of collapse. Angus's muscles screamed, his lungs burned. Ephiara's knees buckled as she laid the baby down on the bedding. Angus opened the kit. Inside, anti-fever serum, nanopatches, nutrient gel. He looked at her asking permission without words. She nodded. He injected the serum. Waited. Minutes felt like centuries. But slowly, the baby's breathing softened. His color shifted. He stopped crying. Slept peacefully. Angus leaned back, dizzy with relief. Ephiara stared at her son like she had just touched a miracle. Then, slowly, she looked at Angus. Tears glistened in her alien eyes. And that's when it happened. She crawled to him, quietly, gently. And with a voice so soft it could barely cross the fire, she whispered, "All I have left to offer is myself." Angus stared at her, stunned. She wasn't offering out of desire. Not love, not lust. Just sacrifice, because in her mind, this was the only way left to repay him. The cave was still. Outside, the wind had died, as if even the storm understood the weight of what had just happened. Leorin was asleep. For the first time in days, the child's chest rose and fell without strain. The fever had broken. His color had returned. The soft rattle in his lungs had quieted. Ephiara didn't speak. She hadn't sensed the injection. She sat near the fire, legs folded, arms wrapped around herself, not in cold, but something else. Something deeper. Her posture wasn't relief. It was resignation. Angus stood near the cave's edge, staring out at the icy horizon, letting the silence settle around him like snow. He had done it. They had done it. The child would live. That should have felt like victory. But a didn single quotes t. There was something unspoken in the air now. Heavy, waiting. He turned back and saw her watching him. Her golden eyes flickered with firelight. And fear. Not fear of him, but of what she was about to do. She rose slowly, like every movement was a decision. Angus didn't move. Just waited. Ephiara stepped toward him, her eyes never leaving his. Then, quietly, she knelt before him. Her hands trembling, her cloak slipping from her shoulders. She whispered, voice barely audible, "All I have left to offer is myself." Angus's heart stuttered. He took a slow step back. "What?" he asked, though he had heard her clearly. Ephiara's gaze didn't flinch. "You saved my son. You gave. I give." Her words were broken, but the message was clear. This was her idea of repayment, of restoring balance, of proving she was not a burden, but worthy of survival. She didn't want pity. She wanted purpose, but to Angus, it felt like a blade to the heart. "No," he said, voice sharp. "You don't have to do this." Her brows drew together. "I have nothing else." He stepped closer, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. "You gave me shelter. You saved me before I ever saved you," he said. "You owe me nothing, but you gave more," she whispered. "Your life, your pain. For my child, that wasn't a transaction. Ephiara, that was a choice, a human choice, a good one." She looked at him then, truly looked, searching for a lie. She didn't find one. Her body slumped slightly, not in disappointment, but in emotional collapse. Her strength had been stretched to its limit, and now there was nothing left to hold it together. She sat down slowly, her hands pressed to her face, and then, to Angus's quiet astonishment, she wept. No sobs, no cries, just hair, silent, shimmering streaks sliding down her cheeks. She cried like someone who hadn't allowed herself to break for a long time. Angus didn't speak. He sat beside her, not touching, just present. Eventually, she found her voice again. "My people, we share what we have, body, spirit. If one saves another, we give what is left." He nodded, slowly. "But I'm not your people, and I don't want what's left." She looked at him, confused. "I want you to live," he said softly. "Not give up more, not surrender, just live." The fire crackled between them. Ephiara breathed slowly, her shoulders softening for the first time, and in that flickering warmth, something passed between them. Not desire, not duty, but dignity, a bond that didn't require payment, a connection born from shared loss and choice. Later that night, Angus found himself lying beside the child, who now slept peacefully on a bed of cloth and moss. Ephiara sat across the cave, her eyes closed, face calm at last. She had offered her body because she believed that was all she had left. But Angus had seen what she truly had to give: strength, kindness, love, not romantic, Not sexual, something older, something purer, the kind of love that lets someone else live, even if it costs you everything. And maybe that was what made her more human than most of the people Angus had ever known. As the night deepened, Angus stared into the fire, listening to the quiet breathing of mother and child, and in that stillness, he made a vow, not out loud, not in words, but in the deepest part of his soul. He would protect them. No matter the cost, not because she offered herself, but because she didn't have to. Morning arrived quietly. The sky above the mountains was soft with light, like a wound beginning to heal. The snow had stopped, the clouds had parted. And inside the cave, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, there was peace. Leorin slept soundly, his fever gone. Ifiara dozed lightly beside him, her body still, arms wrapped around the boy like armor forged from devotion. And Angus sat at the mouth of the cave, watching the light stretch across the white plains, his thoughts louder than the wind. He hadn't activated the distress beacon. It was fixed, charged, ready, but it remained untouched. Because if he pressed it, they would come, they would take him home. And take her as somewhere else, to a lab, a prison, a table, and Leorin, a specimen, or worse, an orphan all over again. No, he wouldn't let that happen. Not after everything. That night, he and Ifiara didn't speak much. There were no grand declarations, no poetic goodbyes, only quiet glances. And understanding. He had come here a soldier trained to scout, observe, report alien activity. But this woman, this alien, had shown him something his own people had forgotten. Humanity. Not the kind that comes with flags and uniforms and orders. The kind that shows up when no one's watching. The kind that wraps a dying man in warmth and gives a stranger half her food. The kind that doesn't ask for anything, but offers everything. Days passed. Then weeks, the seasons began to shift, the snow retreated from the hills like a tide going out. Small patches of green poked through the white. Angus stayed, he repaired the cave, fortified the entrance, built a chimney from scavenged metal so the smoke wouldn't rise in a visible column. He dug trenches to divert rain. He hunted with sharpened sticks and Ifiara's reed tube weapon. Ifiara taught him her ways, how to listen to the earth, not just walk on it. She laughed more, not often, but when she did, the entire world felt a little less broken. And the child, Leorin, he began to thrive. He crawled, then walked, then ran tumbling through the mossy floors of their new home. He would cling to Angus's back, mimic his every move, call him something that wasn't quite a word, but meant everything. One day, Ifiara looked at Angus with a rare softness in her eyes and said simply, "You're his." He didn't know how to reply. So he smiled and nodded. Eventually, the patrols stopped flying overhead. The war was over, at least on the surface, but for Angus, something else had begun. He wasn't lost anymore. He'd found something in that cave. Not just survival, not just shelter, but home. On the anniversary of the crash, he took the old beacon, the one he had never activated, and climbed to the ridge. He looked out over the frozen world, the emptiness, the silence, the beauty. He held the beacon in his hands, then he buried it beneath a stone cairn, not as rejection, but as a symbol. He wasn't running, he wasn't hiding, he was choosing, because, in the end, this story wasn't about war, or aliens, or Earth. It was about a woman who had nothing, but still gave everything. It was about a child who was dying, but lived. And it was about a man who came from the stars looking for answers, but found something far greater than knowledge. He found a family. And maybe that's what real love is. Not a contract, not a reward, not an exchange of bodies or promises, but a decision. To stay. To protect. To become something more than human, by learning what it truly means to be one.